All right, so my content area is physical education. My unit plan focus was on the 5 fundamental movement patterns. I chose to use Washington State Standards 1 and 2. And then my educator standards and my student standards, which I'll go over really quick, are pretty much the same throughout, right? So we did leader, designer, and facilitator from an educator standpoint. From a student standpoint, we did empowered learner, digital citizen, and knowledge constructor. Um, excuse me, Washington State Standard 2, students will apply knowledge of concepts, principles, strategies, and tactics related to movement and performance. All right, so let's go down and look at our day one learning objective. So our high school students will, this is a high school lesson plan, our high school students will identify an example of the squat and hinge patterns using some type of social media. All right, our technology integration is going to be basically the same for these first three. Our objectives are going to be almost the same for the first three. Same thing with our assessment. Same thing with the lesson activity. Same thing with the research base is actually going to be the same all throughout. And that's just basically showing research that technology is beneficial to in improving learning. And our modifications are the same, right? We will modify as needed for any student with a disability, ideally by pairing them with another student because we're going to be doing group work. If we can't pair them adequately with a student and they're just not able to participate, then I will work a little bit more closely with them. We might have them only give one example. I might help guide them through that type of stuff. Um, and then our resources will be computer, projector, and internet. So let's go over kind of what this lesson will look like, and then I'll kind of talk about how it'll change from basically lesson to lesson. So it'll start with class will begin with a brief recap of the week prior's content. Right, in the week prior, we're going to talk about the 5 basic human movements. I'm going to give them examples. I'm going to explain why these are examples of these and not something else, right? So with a squat and a hinge, they're very, very similar, right? A deadlift and a squat pattern are very, very similar. The big difference is where most of the movement occurs, right? So we're going to dive into that the week prior. Then I will use a projector to explain the day's assignment, what, how, and why, right? So why are we doing this? How are we going to do this? And what exactly are we doing? From there, I will demonstrate how to identify a source using Instagram. Today's source, or day one source rather, will be the squat and hinge. So I'll give them an example of a squat, I'll give them an example of a hinge, and tell them to refer back to their notes. And then students will break up into groups of 3. They'll gather around a computer station. I chose groups of 3 because I think that it eliminates a lot of carrying by other students. And what I mean by carrying is if we only have groups of 3, I think students are more likely to engage each other. It's not an overwhelming number that you can get kind of lost and allow like 1 or 2 students to do all the work. So I think those 3 students will have to do, a considerable amount of the work collectively together. And then basically what they're doing is they're just finding 3 examples of the squat pattern, the hinge pattern using social media, right? So each of those examples are worth 1 point, regardless if they're an accurate representation. So if they find 6 videos, 6 examples rather, and it can be on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook or YouTube, they're going to get a point for that. If they also are accurate representations of squatting and hinging, they're going to get a point for that as well. So they can get up to 6 points here, and then another 3 here, 9 on each. So squatting and hinging, which is a total of 18, right? And again, the students gave 2 or more accurate reasons why the examples represent the pattern, right? So example for squatting would be um, the movement occurs with more knee movement than hip movement. And then another example would be that it is working the same muscle groups as a squat pattern, right? So a lunge and a squat work the same muscle groups. Single leg RDL and a deadlift work the same muscle groups, so on and so forth. Day 2, the only difference is we're working with pressing and pulling. So if you look at our objective is slightly different. High school students will identify an example of the press and pull patterns using some type of social media. Our assessment's the same. We're still using social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, such and so forth. Lesson activities, it's literally the same lesson. We're just going to focus on, hey, we're going to use pressing and pulling, okay? Research base is the same, modifications are the same, materials are the same, rubrics the same, but I want pressing and pulling. Again, we can get 3 points for each video. Each of those videos can get another point if it's an accurate representation of a press or a pull, and the students give 2 or more accurate reasons why the examples represent the pattern. Day 3 is a little bit different. Okay, we're going to change our standard focus. Our standard will be standard 1. Students will demonstrate competency in a variety of motor skills and movement patterns, right? So they're going to develop and demonstrate the ability to perform a squat, a hinge, a press, a pull, and a rotation. All right, so let's look down here where we really change. So we've got 2 objectives here, and this is more of a hybrid, this lesson right here, than the other 2. The other 2 will be very similar. High school students will identify an example of rotational pattern using some type of social media. And then high school students will demonstrate an example of a rotation pattern by recording themselves doing it on their cell phone. Okay, and they can use whatever pattern they want as long as it's a rotational pattern. Our technology integration changed it a little bit. We're going to again have social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and also a cell phone to record and demonstrate the movement pattern. Now, I understand that not every high school student is going to be able to afford a cell phone, but I'm fairly confident that over 33% of my students will have a cell phone. And our assessment. So our assessment has changed just a little bit. They will be assessed on their ability to create a source of a given movement using their phone to record it. Okay, so we can go down here. This rubric is not correct. I need to change that. The rubric actually would look like this. I'll change that before I submit it. Did the students create a video? They get 1 point for each video created. So they're going to create 3 examples of rotational pattern. And then was the example an accurate representation of the pattern? So if, again, each of those are a representation of the rotational pattern, they'll get a point for it. And then we just give 2 or more accurate reasons why the example is represents the pattern, right? Well, this is rotation because it moves in the transverse plane, right? Or this is rotation because we're resisting rotation here. That's still the same pattern, okay? Now going down into day 4, same standard, right? Standard 1, students will demonstrate competency in a variety of motor skills and movement patterns. Same educator standards, same student standards. Learning objective has changed. High school students will demonstrate an example of a squat and hinge pattern by recording an example with their cell phone. So they'll need a cell phone for this. And then their assessment is just what we went over, right? The other thing I threw in there at the end, though, I want to do a check for understanding on day 4 and day 5. I want to ask them with an exit pass if they can name the 2 patterns discussed for the day, which should be easy. That's give me points. You get 1 point there. Name the 3 muscle groups for each pattern discussed. Name 3 muscle groups for each pattern discussed. So 3 muscle groups that are involved in the movement. I'm going to change the wording on that just a little bit before I submit it. And then the importance of these muscle groups overall to health and fitness, right? So they can actually, for number 2, they can get 3 points for each of the movements. So they could potentially get 6. That's 7 for number 1. And then for question number 3, they'll just get 1 point for each of those. So that's a total of 9 points there. Well, lesson activities are pretty similar. We're going to do a recap, and then I'm going to jump back on the projector and talk about what, how, and why. I'll give examples of each of the 5 movement patterns, and then I'll demonstrate how to record basically one of these patterns with a phone. I'll grab a student and I'll have them demonstrate. I'll just have somebody volunteer, and we'll just shoot a real quick video of, let's say today we'll do a squat. And then they can use that same example. It's fine with me as long as they can justify why they used it. Modifications are the same, resources are the same, computer, projector, internet. And here's the rubric. Again, did students create a video? Okay, they get a point for each video created. It should be 6 total videos. Was the example of the video an accurate representation of the pattern? Was it a squat? Was it a hinge? And then give me the reasons why they're accurate representations. Day 5 is the same exact thing. The only difference is now we're looking at pressing and pulling. They're still going to record it using their cell phone. Assessments are still the same. We're going to use the rubric assessment, and then we're also going to use an exit pass as well. So these last 2 days, they can get a ton of opportunity. There's a ton of opportunity for points there. Same thing, we're going to do a recap. I'm going to explain the what, how, and why. I will demonstrate how to record a video. I'll give them an example of a movement pattern. Let's say this time I'll use the push-up, right? That's a pressing pattern. They can do that same thing. And then here's a rubric again. That's pretty much the gist of my unit plan, right? And it's basically, it's kind of sandwiched in the middle. From here, we're going to get into more of the nuts and bolts on how we can write a program effectively, how we can balance the body using our 5 movement patterns, and why these movement patterns are important to know. My hope is that these students understand how to correctly write programs, how to assess programs that are written, and how to take care of themselves long term through adulthood. And that's pretty much all I got.